Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the damp hush of a 17th century village. The kind where the cobblestones never seem to fully dry and the air smells faintly of smoke, rain, and the sour temps of brewing ale. The sun's almost gone, sliding behind a low bank of clouds, leaving the streets in that strange in-between light half-shadow, half-glow. Somewhere to your left, a dog barks once, sharp and insistent, then falls silent like it just remembered it has better things to do. Probably wouldn't survive long here without knowing a few of the local secrets. This isn't the sort of place where you can stroll in with your hands in your pockets, whistling like you own the place. Less, of course. You enjoy the sensation of every window shutter creaking open just enough for a pair of eyes to follow. You sew before you get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location and the local time down in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The lane ahead narrows until you can almost touch both sides if you stretch your arms wide. Moss clings to the brick, and here and there, candlelight leaks through warped wooden shutters. The village feels like it's holding its breath, which is odd because in the nearby tavern, the muffled sound of laughter and tankards thudding on tables suggests life is still very much going on. It's just that out here, the mood shifts. You notice how people step quickly from one door to another, as though the night itself is something they'd rather not linger in. There's a sharp scent on the wind. Wood smoke mixed with something more metallic. You'll realize it's coming from a little workshop at the bend in the road. Single window glows orange, and inside, a shadow moves in a slow, methodical rhythm. You don't know it yet, but that's where you'll first hear the phrase, which, bottle. Not in a loud, dramatic way, just in passing. Like it's as ordinary as talking about the weather. In this village, it's not unusual to see charms dangling from door frames, bundles of rosemary tied with red twine, horseshoes nailed above thresholds, a sprig of rowan tucked into the lintel. Protection is an everyday affair, but the bottle that's something different. It's not meant to be admired. In fact, the fewer people who know where yours is hidden, the better. As you pass a row of cottages, you notice how the air seems heavier near certain doorsteps, as though the ground is weighted with secrets. In one yard, a black cat slips between. Fence slats pauses and stares at you with yellow eyes that seem far older than they should be. A man standing in his doorway notices your attention and mutters, "Best keep walking." Not all protections are meant for strangers. The street opens briefly into a small square where a public well stands. You stop for a moment, leaning on the worn stone lip. A woman fills her bucket and, catching your eye, lowers her voice. "Bottle's the best way," she says cryptically, then disappears into the lane before you can ask what she means. It's the way she says it, not with fear, but with a kind of resigned practicality that sticks with you. Like she's talking about locking the door at night or banking the fire before bed. A habit, a necessity. You keep moving, the road growing muddier underfoot. The smell of damp earth mixes with the faint sweetness of wet hay. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a church bell toll, though it's far too late for evening service. The sound lingers in the air long after the last note fades, as though the village itself is listening for an answer. By the time you reach the far end of the main street, the sky is ink black, only light coming from the thin crescent of the moon and the odd flicker from an oil lamp left burning in a window. You pause, realizing you're not entirely sure why you've come this far until you see it. A small shape in a side window, backlit by firelight, round, stoppered, and faintly glistening. A bottle, yes, but one that clearly isn't meant for drinking. Something about it feels deliberate, intentional, like it's waiting. Asterisk, you linger by that window longer than you probably should, the cold night air creeping into your sleeves. The bottle sits there in the firelight like a quiet sentinel, short-necked, squat-bodied. It's the kind that might once have held wine or vinegar, but now has an altogether different life. Its surface glints in places where the glass has bubbled slightly during firing, a telltale sign of local craft rather than some imported finery. Through the warped pane, you can make out something inside. Not liquid, exactly, at least not clear. Liquid, it's clouded, almost opaque, with small dark flecks suspended in the murk. You shift your weight, your boots squelching softly in the mud, and wonder what exactly is in there. You don't yet know that the answer is unpleasant and purposeful. The door beside the window opens with a suddenness that makes you step back. A man in a thick russet wool jerkin leans out, eyes narrowing as they adjust to the moonlight. His beard is streaked with gray, though his hairline stubbornly holds its ground under a sweat-darkened cap. Doesn't speak, just studies you in that way. People hear doom-suring, calculating. Then, without a word, he steps back inside. The door shutting with a solid thud. Historians still argue whether such bottles were more superstition than real protection. But in the 17th century, the debate was irrelevant. Were insurance policies and glass meant to trap whatever ill will, cursed, or malevolent force had been set loose upon a household? And if you happened to believe that a neighbor or perhaps someone even closer had been dabbling in witchcraft, you'd want that insurance. You continue down the lane until you spot another light. This one spilling from a low-ceilinged workshop. The air here smells faintly of scorched herbs and hot iron. Inside, a man sits at a table cluttered with small clay cups, bent nails, sprigs of dried plants, and more than a few empty bottles waiting their turn. He doesn't notice you at first. His attention is fixed on wrapping a bit of cloth around something and pushing it deep into the neck of a half-filled jar. You know better than to step inside, so you just watch. His hands are steady, practiced, the motions as precise as those of a tailor threading a needle. He sprinkles in a pinch of what looks like hair, though whether it's human or animal, it's hard to tell, and follows it with something metallic that clinks softly against the glass. When he finally glances up and catches you watching, there's no surprise in his expression, only a faint shake of the head. Some things, he says, are better made without an audience. You step back into the street, the workshop door closing behind you with a dull latch. The village is quieter now, the only sound the occasional drip of water from a thatched eave or the soft scurry of some night creature. The moonlight turns the puddles silver, and your breath hangs in the air like lazy smoke. Up ahead you see a cottage with its shutters half open, candlelight spilling through just enough to reveal the outline of another bottle. This one hanging by its neck from a rafter under the eaves. That's when it clicks. They aren't all hidden. Some are displayed like warning signs or declarations of defiance. The sight stirs an odd feeling in you. Halfway between curiosity and unease, you start to notice them everywhere, now tucked behind fire grates, wedged into attic beams, buried, partway in the earth beneath hedgerows. They're like a secret language only the initiated understand. Each placement carrying its own meaning. By the time you loop back toward the village square, you've counted at least 9, though you're sure you've missed others. You wonder how many of the people you passed earlier today are quietly carrying that same knowledge, just waiting for the moment they might need to use it. The thought lingers as you stand by the well again, listening to the faint creak of a sign, swinging in the night breeze. Somewhere behind you, a latch lifts softly, and footsteps pad across the cobblestones. You don't turn around because somehow you already know they're heading toward one of those bottles. You finally get a close look at one. Not the bottle in the window that one feels too guarded, but a cousin of it. Resting on a work table pushed up against a wall of pegs and drying herbs. The glass is greenish, the sort that turns the world into pond water if you peer through it, and it's heavy in your hands in that reassuring way. Clay mugs are heavy. You tip it slightly, and the contents slide with a slow, reluctant sway, like a secret deciding whether you deserve it. Inside is a fog of liquid, not clear, not opaque, more like tea left too brewed too long. Suspended in it, you spot tiny pale crescents that take a moment to place. Nail pairings. Human, you assume, given their neat little arcs and the way they catch the light. There are darker threads too, hair twisting like riverweed, coiling and uncoiling as the bottle settles. Scattering of iron pins, needles, perhaps a bent nail or tug lean back at you from the murk, their points arranged in no pattern you can see. It looks like a pocket emptied into a storm cloud. You set the bottle down carefully to hands. Flat palms like a guest invited to hold a newborn, and the room seems to exhale at your good manners. If anyone asks later what you saw, you will say, pieces of a person sewn into a trap. That's the logic anyway. A witch's curse is supposed to hunt by scent and signature. Give it a bait that smells like you and bristles with iron, and perhaps the malice will zig when you zag, sliding into the bottle's little and very convincing argument. Mainstream fact slides into place here with the stubbornness of a door latch in 17th century England. Householders sometimes packed witch bottles with urine, hair, and nail clippings, along with pins, needles, and rusty nails, then buried them beneath hearths or thresholds to intercept curses. Archaeologists have found such bottles Bellarmine stoneware, jugs with bearded faces, as well as plain glass under cottage floors and in city cellars. Ow. Their ironwork still bristling like the memory of a hedgehog. The practice turns the body inside out, utterly practical and a touch poetic. Take what is yours, arm it with iron. Hide it under the fire that keeps you alive. You tip another bottle empty this time. Thank goodness, ward your nose. The faintest echo of sharpness lingers in the glass, a ghost of the ingredient no one in the village says aloud until the door is shut. You don't flinch. You've seen medieval medicine chests. If people brew soup from turnip greens and luck from salt, they will certainly recruit the most personal liquid they can provide. If only because it feels like handwriting that can't be forged. Joke 1. You make a private vow never to borrow a drinking vessel in this village without sniffing first. The work table is a catalog of intentions. A twist of red thread accompanies the pins. A sprig of rosemary lies drying beside a pinch of salt. And a little dish holds what might be sulfur yellow crumbs with the personality of a thundercloud. The bottle maker hums to himself, not words. Just the tune a hand invents when it remembers a task without needing a brain to supervise. He drops 3 pence, and plink, plink. Plink then adds the tiniest scrap of blue cloth. From the hymn, he says, catching your look. Something. The house is already worn. Historians still argue whether the iron was meant to stab the curse, to frighten it, or merely to confuse it with a hedgehog's worth of interference. Some argue the bottle worked like a decoy evil, drawn to the nail parings and hair, then tangled by pins until the spell lost its way. Others suggest the iron itself, an old stubborn metal with a long resume of warding off trouble, did most of the heavy lifting. And then there's the camp that insists the real engine was heat. Bury the bottle under the hearth so every fire warms it, simmering the mischief into harmless steam. You decide the answer might simply be yes. Humans like layered defenses. Even our superstitions prefer a belt and braces. The man tidies the table with small, exacting motions, and you notice a folded scrap of parchment with a heart sketched on it. Not a Valentine's heart, the other kind. More like a lopsided pear. He sees you, see it, and smiles. Sometimes they stitch a little packet like a heart. He says softly, prick it with pins for a charm against what pricks you. Quirky tidbit, delivered like a family recipe. Some households sewed heart-shaped sachets filled with hair and herbs, pierced with needles, then tucked the packet into the bottle as if giving the curse a precise target and a place to stay. The image is both tender and bristly, which you suspect. It's exactly the point. He shows you a Bellarmine jug leaning in the corner, salt-glazed and stern, its bearded face grim, and a little comic puffed on the belly. These beardmen, jugs made their way from the continent to English tables by the cartload. Nobody asked them if they wanted a second career as demon traps, yet here they are, their faces now accidental mascots for household defense. You run your fingers over the relief, and the beard feels like curls of frozen smoke. He corks the glass. Bottle with a neat twist seals the joint with wax, then presses a thumb into the warm seal the way a baker might sign a loaf. Under the hearthstone, he murmurs, more to himself than to you, or under the doorstep. Somewhere a foot will bless it all winter. His voice has the calm of someone who knows worry's habits and has crafted a counter-habit to match. You ask, carefully, if a bottle like this ever gets opened? He shakes his head, quick and absolute. If you must do anything, he says, you heat it, make it sweat, make the bad turn on itself. He taps the pins inside with a fingernail. They answer with a dry little chime. But you don't. Invite it back out. Joke 2. You make a note to put "Do not invite malice" back out above your own front door. Right between "Wipe your shoes" and "Please remove curses" before entering. A woman appears in the doorframe, shawl pulled tight, eyes bright with the kind of tired you get from caring more than is strictly reasonable. She sets a tiny bundle on the table. Hair, you think. The color matches the wild crown visible beneath. Her cap and a chipped dish of salt. She doesn't speak, and the man doesn't ask. He simply adds the offerings to a waiting bottle, ties a thread around the neck, and hands it back. She tucks it beneath her shawl with the same tenderness. You've seen around swaddled infants in jars of yeast. Household essentials, all. You turn the earlier bottle once more, watching the pins resettle into small constellations. The hair drifts like smoke, then settles. The nail pairings wink, then go quiet. For a moment, the bottle feels less like a trap and more like a pocket watch for fear, something to hold, to glance at, to tell yourself the hour is under control. Historians still argue whether these bottles were primarily counter-witchcraft devices or a more general medicine for anxiety, an object you could make, hide, and believe in when belief was the only lever you could reach. Fond of that reading, it fits the human hand. On your way out, you pass a shelf of mistakes, bottles that cracked, went cloudy, or simply felt wrong in the making. He keeps them as a reminder. He says that not every precaution lands true, and that some days, even iron pins need a second try. One vessel is so filled with nails it looks like a porcupine learned glass blowing. Another holds a blue thread tied in a tiny sailor's knot. For a husband at sea, he explains. He taps it with a knuckle. Came back, that one. The smile is small and real. Outside, the night leans in a little closer, approving the way the lane keeps secrets without smothering them. You walk past another house and catch the briefest glimmer of green glass half buried at the threshold, like a frog's eye peering up from mud. Somewhere a kettle sings. Somewhere a dog gives the moon a piece of its mind. Somewhere a bottle warms under a hearthstone, pins arranged like small iron prayers. Joke 3. You picture a very polite spirit arriving, reading the situation, and leaving a note, saw the pins, respectfully declining. Best of luck with the harvest. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and keep moving. The village now a map of hidden protections you can't stop seeing. Every door might have a watcher under it. Every fire might be feeding more than soup. It's in a place where winter writes. Long sentences and neighbors sometimes speak in glances. It makes a sleepy kind of sense to place a handful of yourself in glass and ask the warmth to stand guard. The road out of the village dips toward the marsh, and you follow it mostly because your boots have decided they like the sound of squelching. The air here is wetter, heavy with that sweet trot perfume of reeds and river mud, and the ground whispers underfoot like it's gossiping about the weather. The marsh doesn't look like the sort of place that has anything to do with witch bottles until you remember that some of the most potent ingredients didn't grow politely in a kitchen garden. A man in a leather jerkin, his ankle deep in water, stooping to pull up plants with root systems like matted hair. The stalks smell sharp and green, and when he notices you, he holds one aloft. Angelica, he says, as if the name should be self-explanatory. You learn quickly that, in the business of bottling trouble, Angelica root is the friend you call when you need both a bodyguard and a gossip. The plant's been called a holy protector in herbals, and in this damp corner of the world. It's also one of the few things that will grow in spite of spring floods and witch season rumors. Mainstream fact. Early modern herbals did indeed list Angelica along with rosemary, rue, and wormwood as protective plants, often boiled into tonics or tucked into amulets to repel evil spirits. Add them to a witch bottle, and you've got layers of symbolic armor, plant, iron, personal essence, all stitched together in glass. The marsh is practically a warehouse of such possibilities. If you don't mind wet feet and a mosquito chorus, you crouch to help him, fingers slipping on the mud-slick stalks, and he grins. Not for soup, he warns, unless you're feeding it to a ghost. Quirky tidbit. Some households boiled protective herbs not to drink them, but to steam them into the bottle before sealing, believing the vapors would cling to every surface like invisible chainmail. The logic is sound in that home chemistry. Why, if your kitchen smells like Angelica for 3 days, surely any malice will take the hint and move along. He sloshes toward the bank, boots making that affectionate sucking noise that says the marsh would very much like to keep them. Trail behind, feeling the reeds snag at your sleeves. Historians still argue whether the herbs were chosen for actual medicinal effects, wormwood against intestinal parasites, for example, or for their folklore reputations alone. Some argue that a pinch of this and that worked psychologically. The smell alone told the maker the job was done. Others suggest the practical and mystical weren't separate categories at all in the 17th century. A plant could be both medicine and magic, as naturally as a dog could be both rat catcher and companion on higher ground. You find a woman spreading plants on a linen sheet to dry. She shakes the stalks gently, sending small insects hopping away, like they've been caught gossiping. Beside her, a basket of rosemary releases its pine-sweet breath each time the breeze passes. You pick up a sprig and twirl it, imagining it tucked in the neck of a glass bottle alongside a coil of hair, whispering you are safe in a scent, language only the bottle understands. Nearby, a boy is hammering at a nail over a flat rock, squinting like a blacksmith who's just learned how stubborn iron can be. He's shaping the point deliberately, as if a slightly bent needle will make all the difference. It might. In the right folklore, even the smallest imperfection could become a snare evil, snags on a curve the way a stocking catches on a splinter. Joke 1. You resolve never to underestimate the strategic value of bad craftsmanship again. The herbs. Dry in the sun until they're papery, then get bundled in little twists of cloth. You notice some bundles have a thread tied 9 times around, others 7. Lucky numbers, the woman says without looking up. Odd numbers trip them. Who them is doesn't need elaboration. You've been in this country long enough to know that them is anyone or anything you'd prefer not to meet in the dark. She tells you some people will sneak a sprig of herb into a neighbor's bottle as a sort of anonymous blessing, never removing anything, only adding. It's a quiet act of solidarity in a world where misfortune can feel as contagious as laughter. Imagine, you're stoking your hearth one winter morning and beneath the stone. Your bottle smells faintly of rosemary you didn't put there. You might smile, or you might get goosebumps. Both reactions are a kind of warmth. You pass a line of bottles left to dry upside down on sticks, the glass catching light in green, brown, and the occasional rare blue. Each is different, one bulbous and cheerful, another tall and thin like a gossip leaning in, but all have necks narrow enough to keep their contents from escaping. Or, if you prefer the darker interpretation, narrow enough to keep something else from climbing back out. Historians still argue whether the crafting of these bottles was primarily a female occupation tied to household management, or whether certain men, blacksmiths, carpenters, even innkeepers, took on the role as a public service. The evidence is murky. Bottles show up in all sorts of places, sometimes far from any home, sometimes right under the center beam. Whoever made them. The craft required both knowledge of materials and an ear for the unspoken rules of the neighborhood. You help carry a basket of dried herbs back toward the village, the handle biting into your palm in that satisfying way that says you're carrying something worth the trouble. The smell mingles with the faint tints of river mud still clinging to your boots, and you realize you now carry a small portion of both the marsh and its secrets. Joke 2. You imagine explaining to a 21st century customs agent why your luggage smells like a medieval apothecary had a love affair with a swamp? By the time you reach the lane again, the air is cooler and the houses are glowing from within. Somewhere under one of those floors, a fresh bottle will soon rest, layered with hair, nails, pins, and the marsh's green ghosts. It will sit in the dark, absorbing the creak of footsteps and the hum of voices, till one day someone remembers it's there, or until it's found centuries later by someone who doesn't know your name, but recognizes the shape of your fear. And you keep walking because the lane is short, but the night is long, and you have the distinct sense there's more to see, more hands at work, or quiet acts of warding to witness before sleep claims you. The village has become a kind of open book, each cottage a page, each hearthstone perhaps a bookmark, marking the place where someone once said, "Here's where we stop the bad thing." Joke 3. You wonder if centuries from now, archaeologists We'll find your old mismatched socks stuffed in a jar and assume it was some complex ritual of protection. Suppose in a way they wouldn't be wrong. The tavern door yields to your hand with a familiar sigh, the sort that says it's been opened by every hope and worry the village could carry. Inside is the same small orchestra as last night, murmur clink, the soft percussion of a poker. Nudging Cole's butt tonight, the back room is claimed. A curtain hangs over the jam, a woolen thing that once pretended to be a cloak and failed. And from behind it comes the muffled cadence of a woman talking to herself in the way that means she's talking to everything else too. The innkeeper catches your eye and tilts his chin toward the curtain. She's brewing, he says, quiet as a cloak falling on a chair. He doesn't mean ale, he means a bottle. He means the village's last-ditch umbrella, opened beneath a storm. Sky won't admit to. You ease past the curtain and find the back room made small by the business of protection. A three-legged stool holds up a stoneware jug, a low table shoulders a basin, a twist of salt, a sprig of rosemary still wet from the marsh, and a square of blue cloth frayed to honesty. The wise woman of the village, though she'd probably snort at the title, is tying her apron in a knot that has never slipped in her life. Her hair is the gray of wood ash after rain, and her hands carry that calm authority shared by midwives. In good locksmith, she acknowledges you with a glance as quick as a sparrow. Fetch that pinch bowl, she says, and you obey before your brain submits the question of why. The bowl is warm from proximity to the hearth. Inside, a thumbprint of salt clings like frost on a window pane. She tips the bowl, lets the salt fall into the basin, and breaks the silence with a low hum. It isn't a song. It's a tone that keeps her hands in step with her thoughts. Mainstream fact nods along from a corner. Recipes for witch bottles. Recorded in the 17th century often. Call for salt purifying. Drying a domestic sun to be added with pins and personal traces, then sealed beneath the hearth to intercept malefic intentions. Some household manuals advise heating the bottle by the fire afterward to set the charm and make the malice recoil. The wise woman does not quote manuals. She quotes habit. She opens a small lidded pot and adds a measure of liquid that turns the salt sleety. You don't ask out loud because you can identify a private ingredient when you smell one. It's the same logic as last night's bottles. Give the curse your scent to chase, then trap it like a fly coaxed to a honey jar. You hand her the sprig of rosemary, and she crushes it between finger and palm, releasing the green steam of remembered sunlight. She rubs that scent along the inside of a clean glass bottle, as if seasoning a skillet for luck. Name? Ch. Asks, and the woman waiting on the bench shawl tight, jaw set, murmurs it. A child's name, crisp and small as a bell. The wise woman nods once, each syllable stowed like a stitch. She takes up the blue square of cloth and snips it into a rough heart, nothing pretty, just a shape you can recognize in the dark. With a needle already threaded and red 9 knots gathered into the tail shay, anchors 3 stitches around the edge. Hold, she tells you, and you do. Cradling the small fabric heart while she adds a single hair and 2 nail pairings tangible. Proof a body is hoping to be guarded. She pricks the heart with a pin, not hard, just enough for the metal to say present. Pin for pricking tongues, she mutters. Pin for pricking malice. Pin for pricking fear so it leaks out slow. She drops the heart into the bottle, follows with a constellation of pins, pours in the salted liquid until the fabric floats like a curative cloud. Historians still argue whether the spoken words mattered, whether the muttered phrases were spells, prayers, or just the verbal scaffolding that keeps the hands from trembling. Some scholars insist the power lay entirely in the materials: urin, iron, salt, rosemary, apothecaries, arithmetic. Others hear an older music in the mumbling, the way sound sketches a fence where you want the world to stop. Watching her. You take the ecumenical view. Why not both? The bottle is architecture. The voice is mortar. A small iron pan warms in the coals. She sets the wax to soften in its lip beeswax, sweet on the errand, while it blushes to readiness. Ties a thread about the bottleneck. 7 turns widdershins, 2 sunwise, a knot that remembers the sequence without consulting anyone. Quirky. Tidbit accompanies the motion, she tucks a single caraway seed under the knot. For wandering things that dislike being told to stay put, which could mean mice or malice or the bad luck that refuses to take a hint, you take a private note to start telling your own wandering thoughts caraway when they overstay their welcome. Joke 1. You decide this might be the medieval version of the Do Not Disturb sign, now available in herb form. She pours the softened wax around the cork, smoothing it with a wetted finger, and presses a small seal. No heraldry, just a plain ring turned into a stamp by purpose. Under the hearth, she says to the mother on the bench, who hasn't moved except to breathe shallowly, not deep. Near enough for the warmth to mind it. The woman nods, the sort of nod people give when they've run out of coin, and found one last tucked in a seam. You, perhaps foolishly, ask if the bottle must be heated to work. The wise woman tilts her head. You make soup? You want the flavor to meet itself, she says. Same with this. He makes the iron speak. And when iron speaks, unkindness listens. She adds, more practical than mystical, and a warm thing under the hearth reminds you that you've done something. Doing something is half the cure. Joke 2. You resolve to write that on the wall above your laundry, right next to wash before wearing. She lifts from a basket a second bottle knot for tonight, but old as the dust on its shoulder, and lets you see how the pins have arranged themselves over time, not randomly, but gathered, as if counseled into a little star by the laws of small currents and the way floors tremble with feet. It settles to the house, she says. Knows where the weight falls. You think about the house learning your gait, your laugh, your winter cough. And it makes sense that the bottle would too. Mainstream fact steps in again. Archaeologists uncover which bottles beneath thresholds and hearths with pins and needles. Rusted into clumps, hair still ghosting along the bottle's interior like spider silk. Some contain scraps of cloth or heart-shaped lead sheets pricked with holes. A few even hold sulfur or soot. The detail that always catches you is the personal traceur, and most often because it insists the defense is intimate, individualized. It's not a castle wall. It's a hand over a heart. The mother stands, hands worry smooth on her skirt, and the wise woman tucks the bottle into a sack with a clink that reassures. Payment is quiet 2 eggs, a twist of wool, a promise to sweep the church I'll come. Saturday, and you watch the economy of care balance itself without coin. When the mother asks, now, says the wise woman, as though night is precisely when you build your smallest, fiercest fortifications. On their way out, the innkeeper slides a mug toward the wise woman. For the throat, he says, which in tavern language is both medicine and thank you. She nods, drinks, and only then gives you the full weight of her attention. You'd bottle for yourself? She asks, not unkind. You'd hedge, maybe, if you knew how. If the worry had teeth, then you start with your hands clean, she says, dipping hers into the basin where rosemary floats like a fleet of small green boats. You name the fear, even if only in your mouth. You give it pins and a place too. Be that is not you, and you give the bottle warmth. After that, and here she shrugs with the cosmic patience of craftspeople everywhere, you let the house keep watch with you. No one keeps watch alone. Joke 3. You glance at the curtain, imagine the bottle under your future hearth, and vow to warn guests not to tidy under your floor, lest they reorganize your defenses by accident. You carry the basin back to the main room, where the tavern's ordinary music resumes. Spoons, talk, the low chuckle of the dog as it dreams. Behind you, the wise woman folds her apron, watches the coals reconsider their glow, and listens for the small sound that means the bottle's wax has settled. Out in the lane, the air smells of new rain coming. Under at least one hearthstone, iron is already waiting to tell it where to go. By the time you step back into the night, the lane has gone quiet in that way only small villages manage quiet that still hums faintly with chores finished. Shutters latched, and 1 or 2 voices carrying through thin walls. The air smells different after rain has been threatened. There's the taste of iron and leaf on your tongue, and in the distance, a barn door thuds once. Like the closing punctuation of a sentence, the day it's been muttering since morning. You're walking toward the low bridge when you catch sight of a man bent over in the ditch with a lantern, a sort of posture that says either lost a coin or doing something no one else needs to witness. As you draw closer, the glow of the lantern frames a familiar set of tools: small spade, leather satchel, and resting on the earth beside him, an empty green glass bottle. It's slimmer than the tavern's bottles, more like a vessel for a cordial, but the intent is obvious once you notice the neat row of bent iron nails waiting beside it. He straightens when he hears you, lantern swinging just enough to make the shadow of his hat brim leap like an alarmed hare. "Evening," he says, in that studied, casual tone people use when they're halfway through something they can't explain quickly. You return the greeting, and your eyes slide toward the bottle. He follows your gaze, sighs, and sets the lantern down so the light catches the rain-brushed grass. Mainstream historical fact drops into place here, which bottles weren't only household defenses set discreetly under the hearth, they were also buried at property lines, under doorsteps, and at crossroads. It's meant to catch whatever harm might be traveling the roads looking for a place to call home. Nails, pins, and even shards of broken pottery often went in first to snag the ill will. Personal traces came next, followed by herbs. Finally, a ceiling of wax, or pitch, to keep everything contained. This man isn't burying his bottle under his own hearth. No, he's making a sort of magical customs post at the edge of the village. He explains it without much prodding. It's for travelers, he says, not unkindly. It's most pass through fine, but you get the odd one bringing their shadows with them. You let those shadows roam free, they'll find a latch to lift. Glance toward the bridge, half expecting to see a shadow loping in on long legs. Nothing. Only the silver curve of the stream and the reeds making their small applause in the breeze. Still, there's something satisfying about the idea of a sentry stationed here, even if it's made of glass, nails, and intention. Joke 1. You think about setting one outside your own door, labeled bills and unsolicited advice. Go here. From his satchel, he produces a twist of coarse linen. He unfolds it to reveal what looks like a handful of peppercorns. No, but they're not juniper berries, dried and dark, carrying that sharp green scent, even in the night air. He drops them into the bottle with a sound like tiny marbles. Juniper. For confusion, he says, "Hey, if something comes sniffing, it loses the path." Quirky tidbit. In some rural traditions, bottles meant to deter witches or spirits were given labyrinth herbs, plants whose scent or pattern supposedly disoriented malice. Juniper, rosemary, and knotted rushes all made appearances in records. The idea being that even invisible pursuers could be tricked into wandering in circles until daylight embarrassed them into leaving. He adds the nails one by one, not pouring them, as though each needs to be individually committed to the cause. You ask if it matters how many. Some say 13, he answers. Some say as many as you can spare. I've settled on 9. It's enough for a warning. Not so many you waste good iron. He says it with the thrift of a man who's counted his nails and his blessings in the same breath. Historians still argue whether these border bottles had the same origin as the domestic ones, or whether they were a fusion of older wayfaring charms, those that involved burying objects at thresholds, or paths to turn aside ill fortune. Some argue they were more symbolic than practical, a way of signaling to the community that a watch was kept. Others insist the placement at liminal spaces the bridge, the style. The bend in the road was precisely to intercept trouble before it could step into everyday life. He produces a sliver of beeswax wrapped in parchment and lets it warm briefly in the lantern's side heat before pressing it into the bottle's neck. The wax is darker than the tavern's, almost amber, and it releases a faint honeyed smoke as it seals. If the wax cracks, he says, you know the bottle's done its work. You dig it up, you make another. The matter-of-factness is oddly reassuring. It's like hearing someone describe how to patch a roof after a storm. It's not if, it's when, and you just deal with it. Joke 2. You imagine a village notice board with postings like lost, one malevolent spirit, last seen stuck in bottle by bridge. The burial is quick. He's already chosen a spot where the earth is soft from mole work, and in goes the bottle, nails and juniper, clinking faintly as it tips. He smooths the soil with the side of his boot, then scatters a few dry leaves over. No need to mark it, he says. Better if it's a secret between me and the ground. You can't help thinking that the ground must have a very full diary of such confidences. A bat loops overhead, late to some moth banquet, and you both watch it vanish into the dark above the stream. Good sign, he murmurs, though he doesn't explain why. Maybe it's enough that the night seems unbothered. He lifts the lantern, and for a moment, you both stand there like wardens of a border only you recognize. Mainstream fact again. Nudges in. Excavations near old bridges and lane crossings have turned up bottles whose contents were so corroded they looked like lumps of stone. But chemical analysis revealed traces of urine, plant oils, and iron. In some cases, seeds from plants no longer grown in the region suggested a ritual element, perhaps a deliberate choice of foreign plants to ward off foreign threats. Before you part ways, he offers you one piece of advice. If you pass by and hear it rattling, he says, don't open it, don't touch it. Just give it a nod and keep walking. He smiles faintly. A bottle like that's having a conversation you don't want to join. Joke 3. You file that under top 10 things not to hear from a stranger in a ditch. You leave him to his lantern glow and cross the bridge, the planks sounding. Under your boots like the ribs of some long sleeping beast. On the other side, the road swallows you back into its evening hush. And you can't shake the sense that, somewhere behind you under a small mound of earth, a glass sentinel has already turned its face toward whatever the night might carry in. Asterisk. The road curves toward a stand of hawthorn trees, their pale blossoms catching what's left of the moonlight like scraps of cloth snagged on thorns. You duck your head beneath a low branch, and the air shifts cooler, scented with the faint tank of something herbal. It takes you a moment to realize the smell is coming from ahead, where a crooked stone cottage huddles half in shadow, half in moon-pale glow. A faint scratching sound meets your ears before you see her, a woman kneeling by the hearth inside, visible through an open shutter. She's not young, but her movements are sure deft, like someone who has spent decades doing exactly this. In her hands, she's holding a bottle not green like the ditchman's, but cloudy, with a pale glaze of sediment clinging to the inside. She tips in what looks like a sprig of something silvery wormwood. Mabion then follows it with a scattering of coarse salt. This is your first real glimpse into the domestic side of the witch bottle ritual. Mainstream historical fact slides neatly into place by the 17th century in England. Many households believed a properly prepared witch bottle could draw on curses sent their way. The salt, protection, the wormwood, repellent, and then, crucially, something personal, nail clippings, hair, or even a drop of the household head's urine to lure the spell in and trap it. You watch as she reaches for a small wooden bowl on the floor and pours in a thin stream of some liquid, could be cider, could be something much less appetizing. She wipes the rim with the hem of her saffron-colored kirtle and sets the bottle before the fire. It's close enough to warm, not so close it bursts. Heat, it was thought, agitated the malevolent force, forcing it to writhe and eventually destroy itself in the container. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, they swore you could hear the battle inside the bottle pings, pops, and a faint hiss as the trapped ill will met the iron nails and salt. A strange sort of domestic symphony, equal parts terrifying and comforting. The woman before you doesn't seem to expect any noise tonight. Her expression is calm. It's more like someone checking a stew than fighting off evil. Historians still argue whether these hearthside bottles were intended to be purely functional or also symbolic acts like lighting a candle not just for its light, but for the meaning it carries. Some researchers even suggest the process was part of the charm, that it mattered as much for the participants to see themselves taking action as for any supposed supernatural interception. Joke 1.
Ouch.
You imagine future archaeologists puzzling over a cache of coffee mugs and concluding they were defensive talismans to ward off workplace spirits. From a corner, a cat pads into the room, a black and white creature with the self-assured gait of something that knows it is free run of the place. It sits by the hearth, tail flicking, and watches the bottle with unnerving stillness. You've heard that? In some tellings, cats weren't just suspected companions to witches. They were believed capable of sensing the very forces these bottles aimed to trap. Whether this feline is on guard duty, or just waiting for its next bowl of milk is anyone's guess. The woman leans forward, murmuring something you can't quite catch. Could be a prayer, could be an inventory of ingredients. She sprinkles in one last handful of rosemary, the green needles looking almost jeweled in the firelight. Rosemary, you recall, was one of the most common herbs in protective magic, beloved as much for its scent as for its supposed ability to confuse or repel malign entities. Joke 2. You mentally note that if evil spirits can be scared off, rosemary. Your aunt's kitchen at Christmas is basically a fortress. She seals the bottle with a rough-cut cork, pressing it in with the heel of her hand until it squeaks against the glass. Then comes the wax beeswax again, golden and faintly sweet-smelling, dripped slowly around the cork until it makes a neat dome. Every move is deliberate, almost ceremonial, though she doesn't wear the sort of solemn expression you might expect. Instead, there's a faint smile tugging at her lips, as if she's thinking, that should do it. She stands, brushes her hands on her apron, and picks up the bottle with both hands. Rather than bury it, she carries it to the far wall and tucks it into a niche near the floor place that looks like it's been waiting for it. Many households kept their bottles hidden but close, believing proximity was key to keeping watch over the trapped threat. Outside, you shift on your feet, the cool damp of the night seeping through your shoes. The cat glances toward the window, meets your gaze, and blinks slowly as though to say, you've seen enough. You take the hint and step back into the shadow of the hawthorn. Mainstream fact circles back. Archaeological digs in Old English villages have turned up hearthside bottles still intact, their corks preserved by the dry heat of centuries. Contents once hair, herbs and sharp metal often crumble to dust on contact with air. But residue analysis still tells the story. Salt crystals, tiny iron fragments, and even pollen grains from plants long vanished from the immediate area. Joke 3. You can't help but think these bottles are the 17th century equivalent of a do not disturb sign. You make your way down the path from her cottage, the sound of your boots muffled by grass. The moon slips behind a cloud, and for a moment, you walk in near darkness, guided only by the memory of the path and the lingering scent of rosemary in the air. Somewhere behind you, a bottle sits by a hearth, its shadow long and still, holding fast to whatever might have been on its way. Asterisk, you're halfway down the lane when you hear it up. Sound like a hiccuping gasp from a house that usually minds its volume. Then a sharper noise follows, brittle and final, the kind of crack that makes your spine tighten in sympathy. You stop. Even the night takes a step back. From the cottage with the ivy-strangled lintel comes a woman's voice, taut as wire. Oh. Saints preserve, the door flies wide and spills lamplight across the mud. Inside smells of soap, onion, and fresh panic. On the hearth, a small scatter of glass winks in the firelight like fallen stars. A bottle no, a bottle wasilize in 3 major pieces, and a dozen memorably inconvenient ones. Their edges already smudged by ash. A thread of salted liquid crawls toward the ash bed. It has the guilty look of a child discovered halfway through. A jam pot, the householder broad-shouldered, apron tied as if it's been in a wrestling match, hovers with a broom and doesn't dare move. I was shifting the iron trivet, she says, voice high and thin, and the stool caught just. She doesn't finish. She doesn't have to. The hearthstone, where a bottle has warmed all winter, now looks naked, indecent. The cat of the house, a sleek tortoiseshell, has retreated to the settle with ears flattened to a geometry that means no thank you to whatever this is. Mainstream. Fact steadies your thoughts. People in the 17th century didn't only make bottles, they maintained them. Stirring fires, sweeping hearths, moving iron zany, of it could bump a bottle. Instructions from the period cautioned to keep such charms near the heat, but not in it, lest it crack and fail of its work. Some accounts even claimed that a sudden breaking meant the bottle had met the malice and undone it. Like a mousetrap snap, announcing victory. Of course, that's not how it feels when you're looking at your household's courage smashed. Like a dropped teacup, you crouch, careful as a thief in a church, and nudge a shard with the poker. Inside one curved piece cling a few stubborn rosemary needles stuck fast in a bead of wax that looks like frozen honey. 2 pins are crossed by chance or fate. A third curls toward them like a pilgrim who missed the procession. The smell is faint but familiar salt, and the echo of something personal folded into water. The woman squeezes her apron. "It's broken," she whispers, in the tone people reserve for news of a bridge washed out. "Let the coals alone," you say, because you've learned that giving orders small, kind ones helps everyone breathe. You shift an iron pan to dam the creeping rivulet, then make a little corral of tongs to fence the largest shards away from curious paws. The cat approves with a slow blink that might also mean you may continue auditioning for the role of useful neighbors. Arrive the way they always do, when a sound puts its hand on the village's shoulder. First one, then 2, then a little trickle, pretending it just happened to be on this lane. The first, through the door, is the baker, still dusted with flour, who sets down a basket of rolls he just happened to be carrying and says pragmatically, "Nothing for it but another." The second is the wise woman, already untying her cloak. She takes in the scene with one sweep of the eyes. Glass, wet ash, tight mouth on the householder. "Right," she says. "Sweep into the shovel, mind the pins. Child, lift the cat." Quirky tidbit falls out of her pocket with the briskness of experience. If the bottle bursts with no hand to it, she says you keep a scrap of glass as a ward in itself. But if you broke it, you carry a shard to the crossroads at dawn and leave it there. Makes the bad lose your address. She says it like a recipe. Reliable if you measure by handfuls and trust heat to finish the work. The householder nods, already calmer with instruction to weigh in her hands. Historians still argue whether people truly believed a break meant danger unbottled, or whether it signified success, the charm taking the ill will and shattering under the strain. Some 17th century pamphlets cheerily advise that a cracking sound from under the hearth betokens relief. Others warn that a broken seal lets in what it kept out. The disagreement is crossed centuries intact, like a particularly well-packed rumor. In rooms like this, though, the verdict is practical. Rebuild, reseal. Rebury before the house has time to think about being unguarded. The wise woman gathers the largest pieces onto a tin plate. You watch how she glances at the seam in the floorboards, as if checking whether the house itself has flinched. "Kettle," she says, and someone pours. Steam lifts, sweet with the ghost of rosemary, as she sluices the hearthstone. She fishes out the crossed pins and holds them up to the light. Lucky accident, she decides, and tucks them into her apron. "We'll reuse these," they remember. What they're for? Joke 1. You privately decide crossed pins would make an excellent coat of arms, Latin motto optional, meaning unmistakable. The baker unrolls a clean cloth on the table, moving the everyday clutter aside. Spoons. A spool of red thread, a pewter spoon that looks perpetually surprised. He lays out the fixings like a supper for an invisible guest. A sprig of rosemary. The householder pulls it from a kitchen jug, 3 iron nails from his own pocket. Bakers accumulate more iron than gossip, a pinch of salt poured into a button-sized mound and a clean bottle the neighbor boy sprinted home to fetch. The wise woman nods approval with exactly the same authority she applies to a breech berth or a stuck latch. "Name it," she prompts. And the householder breathes the house's names into the neck. Husband, daughter, the cat for good measure. You feel the way the room relaxes at the sound of being counted. The baker drops in 1 nail at a time. The clinks sound like the beginning of a very small anthem. The wise woman turns the bottle sunwise once, widdershins once, and tips in salted water. Personal essence follows. Nobody narrates that part. The cork slides home with a squeak like 2 syllables of relief. "Heat," the wise woman says, and the house obliges. The fire steps forward, all orange hands and warm breath, as if it has been waiting to be asked. The new bottle takes its place where the old one did, but with a saucer beneath it this time, a gesture of hospitality to physics. Just near, she reminds a teacher advising a pupil with exciting but explosive hobbies. You want it to sweat, not shout. Joke 2. You vow to adopt sweat, not shout as your personal policy for both soup and stress. as the bottle warms. You hear the tiniest ping from inside glass, expanding, iron adjusting, or the story settling its bones. The householder flinches, then lets out a breath she may have been saving since Michaelmas. The cat hops down, circles once, as if approving the new arrangement, and sits with her back to the hearth, presenting the room with the feline seal of "this is fine." Mainstream fact tucks itself neatly into the scene. Recovered witch bottles often show heat marks on glass and residue rings, consistent with repeated warming and cooling. Some even preserve wax strips like stalactites from old seals reheated to reseal hope. The cycle wasn't a one-off. These were living objects in a domestic ecosystem of tending fires, turning loaves, and counting blessings before they turned back into worries. The wise woman plucks one of the old shards from the tin plate, hands it to the householder. "Crossroads," she reminds softly. "At first light, don't look back." The phrasing has the solemn feel of instructions for ferrying something that doesn't like to travel alone. The householder nods, then surprises herself by laughing once a small, brave sound. "Sweep," the wise woman adds, "practical to the end." Glass seeks feet. The baker, who has been barefoot since Whitsun by the look of him, steps gingerly aside. Neighbors begin to peel away. He's taking a small job with the rinsed tin, a wiped table, a memory to carry to the next doorstep. The wise woman settles. Her cloak then glances at you as if you've wandered too near the edge of a stage. "You see," she says, not unkindly, "when something breaks, you make it again." There's a theology there large enough to seat a congregation. Joke 3. You imagine a sermon titled, "On the salvific properties of spare bottles and friends who arrive with nails and think it would pack the pews." By the time you step back outside, the lane has resumed its night voice, lower, steadier, interrupted only by the occasional drip from eaves. Behind the ivy-strangled lintel, new bottle is learning the contours of its household, the rhythm of chopping, the shuffle of a broom, the thrum of a cat leaping to the window ledge. In a crock on the table, a single shard waits to go walking. At dawn, you close the door gently, as if not to jostle anything you can't see. The moon slides out from a cloud like a coin nudged across a tavern table. You raise your face to it and think about how quickly the village gathered, how neatly the steps fitted themselves to hands. How a ritual becomes a habit becomes, if you're lucky, a story you tell later over bread that proves, against the evidence of the world, that warmth can be renewed. Asterisk, the air on the edge of the village feels cooler. The kind of chill that comes not from temperature, but from leaving behind the pooled warmth of human voices. Your boots make that slow, deliberate sound against the packed earth like each step is negotiating with the road. You follow it toward the little rise where the hedgerows grow tangled and stubborn. It's already thinking of the crossroads, the wise woman mentioned. It's still hours until dawn, but you know the way. The lane curves between two fields lying fallow, their soil turned in clods that catch what little starlight manages to slip between the clouds. A barn owl sweeps silently overhead, all pale wings and unblinking judgment, like a passing inspector. From the Department of Nocturnal Affairs, you consider greeting it, but decide against startling a creature whose neck can turn almost all the way around. Mainstream fact drifts in alongside your steps in the 17th century. The belief in liminal spaces, crossroads, thresholds, river fords was as common as the belief in bad weather. These were places where worlds brushed too close, where the rules bent just enough for something unwelcome to wander through. People left offerings, charms, and, in this case, shards of glass to confuse or lure away the trouble that might follow them home. The quirky tidbit hiding in the hedgerow is that not all crossroads were considered equal. Some swore by those with a hanging tree. Others preferred the meeting of 3 paths instead of 4, a triangle to trip the devil, as one old saying went. Historians still argue whether these preferences were regional superstitions or simply practical. Fewer travelers at a 3-way fork meant less chance of being caught in the act of burying something odd under a moon that looked like it had been polished for the occasion. The road is empty now, except for the sound of your own breathing and the soft clink of the shard in your pocket. It feels warmer than it should, even through the cloth, as if it's been keeping its own nervous counsel. You picture it not as a remnant of something broken, but as the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence you didn't get to write. At the top of the rise, the crossroads waits. Looking exactly as it always does, for arms reaching outward, the hedge is cut lower here so you can see any approach. The dirt in the middle is bare, scuffed by cartwheels and boots, and the hooves of animals who, you suspect, have more opinions about this place than they let on. A squat stone stands off to one side, like in making an unhurried conquest of its surface. Someone has scratched initials there, the kind of legacy that will mean nothing to anyone in 100 years except as proof that someone stood here once, knife in hand, feeling the need to say, "I was." You kneel, careful of the damp. The shard comes out, catching a thin line of moonlight that turns it from dull green to something almost jewel-like. You set it down in the exact center, the way you'd place a chess piece you've been saving for the right move. The earth accepts it without ceremony. In the absence of witnesses, you still hear the wise woman's voice. Don't look back. That's the part people find hardest, not because they believe something will chase them, but because walking away feels like leaving the door unlocked. You straighten slowly, brush your palms on your coat, and turn toward the road home. Shard glints once, and becomes just another dark shape against the soil. Asterisk, joke 1. You think how strange it is that in a century where people feared demons, they still trusted crossroads, arguably the most suspicious geometry nature ever invented. On the way back, you pass the first hint of the east graying. The air smells of turned soil, damp wool, and something faintly metallic that might be frost getting ideas about the grass. Somewhere behind you, the crossroads holds its new treasure like a secret, while ahead the village settles deeper into its pre-dawn rhythm. You let your thoughts wander to the bottles still hidden under hearths. In gardens, even in the low, dark crawl spaces under floors, each one is a silent pact between the maker and the unseen, filled with the little detritus of human life, hair, pins, scraps of cloth. They're not just objects, they're time capsules of worry, hope, and the occasional misguided improvisation. Chicken bones, anyone? Historians still argue whether all witch bottles were truly intended to trap spirits, or if some were simply folk remedies gone ceremonial. Evidence is murky. Thanks to centuries of dust and the tendency for people to tell you the version of a story that best suits the moment, what's clear is that the practice straddled that blurry line between medicine, magic, and household routine. Line villagers walked every day without tripping over the need to explain it. You arrive back at the edge of the village just as a cockerel decides to announce himself far earlier than etiquette allows. Smoke has begun to lift from one or two chimneys, curling lazily in the dim light, as if stretching after a long sleep. You can almost feel the moment the shards work whatever. That may be unhooks itself from your shoulders. The air seems lighter. Or maybe that's just the absence of holding your breath for an entire walk. Joke 2. You decide that if you were ever to start your own line of folk charms, you'd call them crossroad companions and market them to people who just need an excuse for an early morning stroll. By the time you reach the ivy-strangled house again, the hearth has been tended, and the bottle at its sides slightly misted from the heat is doing its quiet work. The cat is back in position, tail wrapped neatly, ears swiveling toward you without moving the rest of her body. You nod at her like two colleagues passing in the hall. The householder steps out to the threshold. Arms folded but face easier. Left it, she asks. You nod. There's no ceremony here, no applause, just the unspoken agreement that life has resumed its usual track. At least until the next odd noise or shadow tests the edges of belief. Mainstream fact slips in like the last guest before the door closes. Many recovered witch bottles in England have been found intact, suggesting that for every one broken by accident or intent, dozens more sat unbothered for decades, slowly gathering the quiet dignity of forgotten guardians. Joke 3. You wonder if in some parallel world, the bottles get together once a year to compare stories, like retired soldiers, swapping battlefield yarns. The sun isn't fully up yet, but you feel the day stretching ahead, a little looser in the joints. The shard is gone, the bottle is warm, and for now, the world has decided to behave. You walk on, the village slowly waking around you, each step carrying the faintest echo of glass against cloth, a sound that tonight you'll only hear in dreams. Asterisk, you take the long way out, not because the road demands it, but because your feet have learned the village's pulse and want a few more beats before letting go. The lane is a soft ribbon under lowering light, hedges burnished with the day's last brass, and every cottage window looks like a held breath. You pass the well, now wearing its evening phase, a darker circle of water that keeps everyone's secrets without keeping score. A wagon squeaks somewhere distant, a hinge consults with the wind, and a dog performs a final patrol of exactly 3 yawns. Your satchel rides light on your shoulder light, but not empty. The wise woman pressed a small bottle into your hand before you left. For learning, she'd said, meaning both lesson and talisman, holds nothing volatile, just iron pins, a thumb of salt, a twist of rosemary, and a square of linen tied with a red thread, a practice piece, a traveling companion. As you walk, it gives a faint ceremonial clink now and then, like a pocket watch, reminding you the hour can be minded, not merely endured. Joke 1. You decide it's the world's quietest maraca, tuned to the key of "I've got this." Road dips toward a little stand of elms, and then rises again to a stile where fields stretch like a cat after a nap. You balance on the top rail and look back. The village has already become a handful of smudged roofs and small steady plumes of smoke. You think of the householder's new bottle warming under stone, the ditchman's sentinel below the bridge, the barn's tortoiseshell cat blinking from her beam, the black mouser in the church garden where rosemary rubs its green perfume onto the air. The map of the place overlays itself on memory. Soft palimpsest, stuffed of glass and heat and intention, mainstream historical fact rises to meet your reverie. Archaeologists lifting floorboards in old city cellars and village cottages have found dozens of which bottles, Bellarmine jugs, and green glass alike under hearths and thresholds. Pins rust welded together, hair still ghosting the interior, salt crystallized along the curve. In London alone, such finds show up in building works with a regularity that says this was no oddity, but a custom stitched into domestic life. You picture the laborers who first met those bottles again, the cautious tap of a trowel, the hush, the whispered, "Best leave it be." The path turns to chalk and then to packed earth again, as if trying on outfits for the evening. At a bend, an elder tree tucks its fragrance around you. Someone has knotted red thread on one of its lower branches, a tiny pledge fluttering over. The ditch. Quirky tidbit the lane brings you as a parting gift. Some parishes, they whispered that an elder branch hung with 9 knots could tarry a witch long enough for dawn to catch her. A polite way of saying light has its own speed. Trap. It pairs nicely with a bottle under the hearth. You think? Defense in depth? Medieval edition. The satchel gives another soft clink, and you are surprised to find it comforting. An object you don't strictly need has decided to become a companion. It doesn't ward wolves or grow bread, but it steadies the story your hands tell your heart. We took care. We set a watch. We walked away without looking back. Historians still argue whether these bottles worked in any measurable sense. Whether they intercepted malice or merely offered focus to fearful minds, the debate is lively, footnoted, and very fond of the phrase apatropaic practice. Out. Here on the road, the question feels simpler. A house slept easier. A mother exhaled. A cat resumed guard. Call it efficacy of the soul. The sun falls behind the far hedge and leaves that gentle blue that happens when day does you the courtesy of not ending too abruptly. A hare starts in the field and threads a line toward the gap in the fence. A rook wheels and folds itself into the black of a beech crown, like a letter slid under a door. Your steps take on that elongated tone night grants, and you find yourself matching the rhythm of your satchel's occasional chime. Joke 2. You try not to step in time so precisely that future antiquarians find your footprints and publish a paper on the peripatetic ritual of the one-bottle walker. The stile yields to the lane that will carry you out. Stone waymarker. Shoulders up from the verge mossy square, earnest with its arrows softened by time, until it points not at a place, but at the idea of leaving. You touch it anyway. Leaving is a place too. The bottle offers one last polite click, and you answer it by pressing your palm to the satchel through cloth. The human habit of touching wood iron, glass stapping luck as though it were a friendly neighbor and not a weather. Pattern feels older than any theory and more practical than any edict. Mainstream fact returns for one, more bow. Manuals and court records from the 17th century mention not only bottles, but a dovetail of practices shoes bricked into chimney voids, horse skulls and rafters which marks scratched into thresholds, rowan twigs over lintels. A whole architecture of reassurance surrounded people who expected both miracle and mishap from the world in roughly equal measure. Your bottle is the tiniest echo of that mobile architecture, pocketable fortification. A farmhouse ahead lifts. One square window of lamplight. Someone coughs. Someone cuts bread. Someone says the sort of small thing that keeps the long thing of life from unraveling. The lane narrows to a ribbon, then to a string. You glance back just once, not to the crossroads. The wise woman would frown, but to the idea of the village, now thoroughly stitched into your thoughts. You find you can carry it without effort. A handful of bottle glints, the green breath of rosemary, the warm grammar of fire. Joke 3. You promise yourself you'll label your keepsake paperweight if questioned, and let it continue its second career as a placebo with good manners. Dusk folds itself properly now, like a shawl shaken out and draped. You follow the last pale seam of road until it forgets to be visible. Then trust your feet to do what feet do best. Go forward. The bottle settles, your breath lengthens. The night hums like a cat pleased with its own performance.
Whether what?
Rides your shoulder as superstition or safety, you don't decide. Only listen to the hush between hedges and let the faint clink keep time with the soft percussion of your steps. Somewhere behind you, under hearthstones, glass warms. Somewhere ahead, the dark opens its hand and reveals a road. The path eases into a gentler dark, the kind that makes edges softer and distances agreeable. Your steps slow without instruction, finding that unhurried rhythm that feels like floating just above the ground. The bottle in your satchel grows. Quiet too, the pins settling, the salt remembering it as a small ocean at peace. The hedges breathe a little rosemary from someone's threshold, a kind, green note that lingers like a blessing. You let the day unspool behind your eyes, firelit. Rooms and steady hands, cats keeping watch from rafters, glass tucked where warmth can find it and stay. The worry that came with you at first now seems smaller. Not gone, just folded and put away like a well-used shawl. Breath in, cool and easy. Breath out, warm and slow. The road accepts your weight without argument, a good host seeing a guest. To the door, far off, an owl calls, and then chooses silence, which is even kinder. The sky, a quiet slate, keeps one or two patient stars for company. As you walk, words lose their corners. Ideas relax into shapes you don't have to name. Might think of a hearthstone, or not. A rosemary sprig, or not. Everything can wait. The house with its bottle is tended. The crossroads, with its shard mines, its small appointment with morning. Your only task is to drift along the stitched seam of night. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let the breath take a little longer coming and going, as if the air itself were cushioning your thoughts. There is a road. There is a warm place at the end of it. And somewhere, tucked into the quiet machinery of the dark, a tiny clink says, "All is well enough for sleeping."